Hello, everybody. So, I hope this finds you well for Thursday, April 23rd. Excuse the board in the back there. I was teaching my 13-year-old son some algebra today, so many hats I'm wearing on this stay-at-home order. So, I wanted to kind of pick up here. So, for Wednesday, your assignment was to watch the two videos on the Kefauver-Harris Amendment and the thalidomide tragedy. So I just wanted to touch base a little bit on that and how important the discovery of this situation was, and the female physician that was appointed to the FDA, and her being able to recognize that this had not had enough extensive testing that was required by the United States and our Food and Drug Administration, and that actually prevented this tragedy from striking in the United States. So I think it speaks volumes to how important and how necessary our Food and Drug Administration is. When you think about it, right now we're just talking about the drug aspect of everything, but the Food and Drug Administration also oversees the foods and cosmetics. So, they're the ones that are involved anytime that there is any type of outbreak for contaminated food, and protecting the citizens of the United States from getting ill. And inadvertently, these manufacturers, these food manufacturers are not purposely contaminating our food. Things happen. For example, rain runoff from certain areas into a garden or a field of lettuce, and then we get the E. coli from the manure. So it's just situations like that, and the FDA is constantly watching and monitoring those situations. Another important thing about the FDA is that they're actually required to yearly visit every facility that manufactures food and every facility that manufactures drugs. So they are required to physically go to those facilities and do inspections to make sure that things are being done properly, that not only is OSHA being followed, for the safety of their employees, but also the way that in which that they are manufacturing the food or they're manufacturing the drug is done so in proper sanitary conditions, and to prevent any issues from going out from there. So we are going to continue on here with slide 18. So this one starts to cover the Poison Prevention Packaging Act of 1970. So this was actually a really important act. This act required both over-the-counter or OTC drugs and prescription drugs to be packaged with child-resistant containers. So prior to 1970 and leading up to 1970, there was a large uptake in overdose deaths for children. And if you have ever had a prescription or even just kind of done some research into see what different types of tablets and capsules look like, a lot of these are very brightly colored. They look like candy. And so there was a high incidence of younger children, typically 6 and under, that were getting into their parents' medicine bottles because they were easy to open, and they were taking the medication, chewing it up, thinking that it was candy, and then they were overdosing, needing medical care. Some children were dying as a result of that. So there are some exemptions to this particular act. And typically those are going to be emergency medications. The most common one you're going to hear referred to as an exemption for this particular act is nitroglycerin sublingual tablets. Well, what are nitroglycerin sublingual tablets? These are tablets that are used to treat angina, which is a form of chest pain. These are nitroglycerin is a nitrate that is used to relieve and stop the constriction of blood vessels inside the chest, inside the blood vessels, and in the arteries and in the veins. And so it helps to cause vasodilation, which means it's opening up our veins and allowing that blood to flow more freely. What happens with patients with angina is that the veins and everything are constricting, which makes it harder for the blood to flow through. That is what's causing the chest pain. Now, this drug is exempt because it's considered an emergency medication, and the reason for that is because there's a specific protocol for nitroglycerin. A patient who suffers from angina, they have specific instructions that indicate how they take this medication. So they're going to dissolve a tablet underneath their tongue, that is what sublingual means, and they're going to do that every 5 minutes for 3 doses. If by the 3rd dose they're not having any relief, that could be indicative of a heart attack, and they need to seek medical attention immediately. Now, with the nitroglycerin, it needs to be in a childproof container, and the reason for that is the bottles are very small. I encourage you to look them up on Google and just to see what they look like. They're glass little amber bottles, and the reason why they're stored in glass amber bottles is because they are sensitive to light and air. So they are only good for 6 months once they are opened. They must remain in that little bottle. So that little glass bottle will be placed into a prescription bottle, and that prescription bottle must have just a flip-on top cap. Because when the patient is suffering from that chest pain, it's going to be very difficult for them to try to, push down and twist to get the childproof caps open. They need to be able to access it in an emergency. And if they had a childproof cap on there, they would not be able to access it as easily as if it did not. The Drug Listing Act of 1972, so this is a very important one. This required that each form of drug to be assigned an NDC number. So the NDC number is a National Drug Code number. So we've talked about this a little bit. National Drug Code numbers are assigned to every single drug. Every manufacturer has a different NDC number for that drug. But within that manufacturer, if they're making that drug from 1980 to current, the NDC number for that particular drug and strength and quantity or size of bottle is going to be the same NDC number from 1980 all the way through till they stop making it. The NDC number is in 3 parts. The first part indicates the manufacturer, so those numbers identify who the manufacturer is. The second part identifies the drug and its dosage form, and the last set of numbers represent the amount in the package. Okay, so if you look at your slide on slide 19, there's actually a example of a morphine label, and it has the identification number, which is the NDC, right on the top there in the top left-hand corner. In the middle of the label, which would be the front of the bottle, and it has that number there. So the 0406 identifies the drug manufacturer. I believe that's an 8. 8003 represents the drug and dosage form, and then the 12 at the very end represents the amount in the package. So if you actually look at the size of the vial, which is in the right-hand corner above the drug name, is 120. The last 2 digits are 12. So that makes sense. It's a 120 ml vial. The last 2 digits of the NDC number are 12. So that's what it represents as the quantity. NDC numbers are required on every single drug and over-the-counter item. This is a way that the FDA tracks it. This is also the way that the drug manufacturers track it. This is also a way that pharmacy tracks it for inventory purposes. But the NDC number has to be on every single bottle, and the reason for that is for things like drug recalls. Now remember with your drug recalls that you're not just going off of the NDC number itself. You're also looking at the lot number and expiration date, because that is indicative of the particular batch. But if you have a bottle of amlodipine 5 milligram from one manufacturer and amlodipine 5 milligram from another manufacturer, those NDC numbers are going to be different. So you're going to want to make sure that when you're checking for a drug recall, that the NDC number matches as well, with the last 2 key identifying markers being the lot number and the expiration date. The Orphan Drug Act of 1983, this was really important. Excuse my dogs, they're having some Zoom issues right now. The Orphan Drug Act was passed because it provided incentives for the development of drugs for patients with rare diseases. These manufacturing of these drugs typically didn't take place very often, and the reason for that, there was no money involved. So if you have a rare condition that only a very small percentage of the population has, there's no money essentially to be made for these drug manufacturers. Diabetes, huge, right? A huge number of the American population has diabetes. So yes, they're going to constantly be discovering and developing new diabetic medications because there's money involved. Now, if you have a patient that has a very rare disease, 1 in 500 patients or even 1 in a million patients have it within the United States, there's not much money to be made there. So the federal government decided, how are we going to address this? We still want these patients to be able to have the same opportunities for drug development and curing the disease, or at least developing treatments for it. And so that's where the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 comes into place. The Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act of 1984, that is a mouthful. This one, it was also huge and really benefited patients or us as consumers because this act was specific to encourage the development of generic drugs to help reduce cost. So you have to remember, though, that when a drug manufacturer brings a new drug to the market, they have 20 years on that patent, which means no other drug manufacturer can make that drug for 20 years. Once that expires, other drugs can now come in and make the generic version. That's where the competition comes in for us. So if you have 6 drug manufacturers that are making the same generic medication, they're going to all start dropping that price down, right? It's going to start driving it down. They're going to try to underbid each other, and we as the consumers benefit from that, okay? Prescription, or let me just give you some examples here. So the picture that you see on slide 20 is actually a picture of Claritin, the brand version, versus the generic version, and it's got the little bullet on there, which indicates that that's a Target brand to me. So the Target version or generic version of Claritin. So when you go into the store, it's just like ibuprofen. If you're going into the store, excuse me, if you're going into the store and you need ibuprofen and you're looking at the shelf and there's so many different options. So let's say you're in Fry's. You're looking at, okay, there's the Motrin brand, right? Which is the brand name to ibuprofen. If you look at that cost compared to the cost of the Kroger version, which is Kroger ibuprofen, Walprofen, they call it different names, but it's the generic version of Motrin, they're significantly cheaper. And so that's a result of this specific act in 1984. The Prescription Drug Marketing Act of 1987. So this one required all drug wholesalers to be licensed by the state in which they sell. Okay, so we have wholesalers here in Arizona. Typically, that is, where most of the facilities in Arizona are getting them. Cardinal Health is actually out of Phoenix. When I worked in New Mexico at their major medical center there, our deliveries actually came from Cardinal Health in Phoenix. So we had ours typically delivered overnight every day, Monday through Friday. So it was pretty convenient for us to have a distributor so close, not too close, but Phoenix is closer than New York, compared to New Mexico. So this act also restricts only prescribers to obtain medication samples. So there was a period of time where drug manufacturers were out and about. They were, bringing lunches to doctors' offices, trying to swoon them into prescribing their medications, and they would leave them tons of samples. But what was happening was some of the doctors were getting a little bit greedy, and they were actually selling the samples to their patients instead of giving them. This act is now in 1987 was developed to prevent that from happening. So prescribers can receive samples from drug manufacturers, but they cannot sell them. They have to give them to their patients free of cost. This act also banned the reimportation of drugs into the United States by anyone other than the manufacturer. Now, some drug manufacturers are outside of the United States, okay? For example, one of the major distributors for normal saline is in Puerto Rico. We know that because we had a huge shortage of it when that massive hurricane came through. But even though it's in Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico is considered a U.S. territory, the FDA still goes in and will inspect those facilities. So what this is preventing, or what this is not allowing to happen, is a different manufacturer, let's say from Venezuela, purchases from the manufacturer in Puerto Rico and then tries to import it from Venezuela into the United States. It will not allow that to happen because the manufacturer in Venezuela was not the original manufacturer. They actually purchased it from the original manufacturer. I'm trying to think the best way to explain this. So the manufacturer in Puerto Rico is the original manufacturer. They are the ones that compound it, distribute it, package it up. Outside in Venezuela, they purchased X amount from them, already done, already made, already completed, and then they try to re-import that into the United States from Venezuela. This is against the law, okay? Any drug being imported into the United States must come from the original manufacturer, no third parties, okay? So some questions here if you look at the year turn, okay? So the first question, the wrong way. The first question says, which agency was created as a result of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, or the FDNC? This is what I told you in some previous videos. You must know that. This is going to be asked on final exams. This is going to be asked on quizzes. This is going to be asked on your national exam, your PTCB exam. So the main agency that came out of the FDNC Act of 1938 was the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The next one, which act established the distinction between prescription and OTC drugs? This was huge too. There was not really a distinction before. So now, as of 1951, the Durham-Humphrey Amendment established that distinction between prescription or legend drugs and over-the-counter. And what that means is the distinction is over-the-counters, you can walk in, you can purchase those without a prescription. All prescription or legend drugs, you must have a legitimate prescription for in order for those to be dispensed to you. Last question, Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act of 1984 encouraged the development of what type of drugs to decrease cost, and that is generic. So they encouraged the development of generic drugs. So once the patent ends, they encourage other drug manufacturers to make the generic version to help decrease costs, overall healthcare costs, but particularly drug costs for the American consumers. And I think we're good there. I'm trying to watch my time a little bit here. If you have any questions, let me know. Heads up, on Friday we are having a Zoom meeting at 10:30. It is a mandatory meeting. We're going to be going over the requirements for your pharmacy law project that you're going to have due. Now, we'll talk about the requirements, what you need to do, and kind of what to expect if we're not back on campus by then, and how you're going to submit it. If you have any questions in the meantime, please, I put my phone number on there. You can call me. If you need to email me, please do. Make sure you're watching these videos. I can see who's viewing them and who's not. A lot of you who aren't viewing these, you're getting the simple answers incorrect. So make sure you're doing your readings, make sure you're watching these, and make sure that you're going through the slides, which again, we're ending on 22, so we picked up on 18. and ended on 22. So that's where you should review and then complete your daily assignment. Okay? Have a good day.